The flight attendant's voice carried through the boarding chaos with unmistakable authority as she addressed 41-year-old Dr. Sharon Hayes and her 8-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Lily, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "Ma'am, I'm going to need these girls to share a seat. We have a full flight and we need to accommodate all our passengers efficiently. Children this small can easily fit together in one seat and it will free up space for other travelers." Sharon felt her jaw tighten as she looked at the 3 boarding passes in her hand, each clearly showing separate seat assignments that she'd specifically purchased months ago: 12A, 12B, and 12C. 3 seats together so her daughters could each have their own space for the 5-hour cross-country flight to visit their grandmother, who was recovering from surgery. Emma and Lily stood beside her, looking uncertain, their matching purple backpacks making them appear even smaller and more vulnerable than usual, and Sharon saw the confusion in their eyes as they tried to understand why this adult was suggesting they squeeze together when their tickets clearly showed they each had their own seat. "We have 3 separate tickets for 3 separate seats," Sharon said, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the anger building in her chest. "My daughters each have their assigned seats. There's no reason for them to share." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia, crossed her arms in a posture that communicated she was done discussing and ready to enforce. "Ma'am, I understand you purchased 3 tickets, but on full flights we sometimes need to make adjustments to accommodate all passengers, and since your children are small enough to share a seat comfortably, that's what we're going to do. Now please have them sit together in 12B so we can continue boarding." Sharon glanced around the first-class cabin where passengers were spreading out comfortably, some with empty seats beside them, some with bags occupying seats while they got settled, and she noticed that Patricia hadn't asked any of those passengers to consolidate or share space, hadn't suggested that anyone else make adjustments to accommodate the full flight, had specifically targeted Sharon's 8-year-old daughters, who happened to be the only black children in the visible boarding area. Other economy passengers were watching now, some with sympathy, others with the uncomfortable avoidance that came from witnessing injustice but not wanting to get involved, and Sharon felt the weight of every assumption being made about her and her daughters, that they probably didn't really need 3 seats, that children sharing was reasonable, that she was being difficult by insisting on what she'd paid for, that this black mother was making a scene over something minor when she should just comply and make things easier for everyone. Emma tugged on Sharon's sleeve, her voice small and worried. "Mom, we can share if we have to. I don't want to cause problems." Sharon's heart broke hearing her 8-year-old daughter already learning to make herself smaller to accommodate others' comfort, already absorbing the lesson that her presence and her needs were less important than avoiding conflict, already being shaped by discrimination that would follow her for the rest of her life if Sharon didn't stand firm right now and show her that their dignity and their rights mattered. "No, baby," Sharon said gently, stroking Emma's hair while keeping her eyes on Patricia. "You don't have to share because you each have your own seat that Mommy paid for, and we're not going to let anyone take that away from you." She addressed Patricia directly, her voice still controlled but now carrying an edge that made several nearby passengers lean in to listen. "My daughters are not sharing a seat. They each have valid tickets for separate seats, and unless you can show me an FAA regulation that permits airlines to force paying passengers to share seats because of their size or age, we're going to proceed with boarding as planned, with each of my daughters sitting in her assigned seat." Patricia's face flushed red, and she pulled out her radio, her voice taking on that tone service workers use when they want to summon authority to back up their position. "I need a supervisor to gate 23. We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." While they waited, a man from row 13 leaned forward, his voice carrying clearly. "Excuse me, but I've been watching this entire interaction, and I have to say, I haven't seen you ask any other passengers to consolidate or share seats. You've only focused on this family, and those are clearly small children who each have their own tickets. This seems like you're making up a policy that doesn't actually exist." Patricia whipped around to face him. "Sir, I need you to stay out of this. I'm addressing a boarding issue, and passenger interference isn't helpful." But the man persisted.
It's not interference to point out that you're treating this family differently than you're treating other passengers. There are people in first class with empty seats next to them. There are passengers with bags on seats, but you've decided these two little girls need to share one seat. That's not a boarding issue. That's discrimination. Other passengers began nodding and murmuring agreement, and Sharon saw several people pulling out phones to record. And she made a decision about what to reveal next, information she'd been holding back because she'd hoped to fly without fanfare, without recognition, without the complications that came with people knowing who she was. But Patricia's behavior and the threat to her daughter's dignity had made anonymity less important than accountability. When the supervisor arrived, a harried-looking woman whose name tag identified her as Denise, Sharon spoke before Patricia could present her version of events. My name is Dr. Sharon Hayes. I'm a senior attorney with the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection. I specialize in airline discrimination cases and passenger rights violations, and what your employee Patricia has just attempted to do is force my 8-year-old daughters to share a single seat, despite each of them having paid tickets for separate seats. She has not asked any other passengers on this flight to consolidate or share space. She has specifically targeted my family, and when I declined to comply with her inappropriate request, she called you to enforce a policy that doesn't exist and that would constitute a clear violation of federal passenger rights regulations. The cabin went absolutely silent, every passenger frozen in place as the implications of what they'd just heard registered. And Sharon watched Denise's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and dawning horror, as she realized her employee had just attempted to violate the civil rights of children whose mother literally prosecuted airlines for exactly this kind of discrimination. Patricia had gone pale, her earlier confidence completely evaporated, and she stammered, I was just trying to, I thought. Denise cut her off with a look that suggested this conversation would be continuing in a much less public venue very shortly. Dr. Hayes, I apologize profusely. This is completely unacceptable. Your daughters will absolutely be sitting in their assigned seats. Patricia will be removed from this flight immediately, and I'd like to personally ensure you have the gate agent's contact information and mine so we can document this incident properly. Sharon pulled out her business card and handed it to Denise. I'll be filing a formal complaint with my office tomorrow morning. I'll be requesting all communications and training materials related to passenger seating policies. I want to review any other complaints against Patricia for similar behavior, and I'm going to be conducting a comprehensive audit of how often families of color are asked to consolidate seating compared to white families, because this felt very targeted and very familiar, as if Patricia has done this before and never faced consequences. She paused, looking at Emma and Lily, who were now holding hands and watching with wide eyes. But more than any of that, I want my daughters to see that when someone tries to take away what you've earned and paid for, when someone treats you as less than you are, you stand firm and you demand accountability, because no one should have to make themselves smaller to accommodate other people's biases or convenience. Denise nodded, her face showing genuine distress. Dr. Hayes, I apologize profusely. This is completely unacceptable. Your daughters will absolutely be sitting in their assigned seats. Patricia will be removed from this flight immediately, and I'd like to personally ensure you have the gate agent's contact information and mine so we can document this incident properly. As Patricia was escorted away by airline personnel, still trying to explain that she'd just been following what she thought were reasonable procedures for managing full flights, Sharon settled Emma and Lily into their seats, making a point of the fact that each girl had her own space, her own tray table, her own window to look out of. The man who'd spoken up earlier approached Sharon's row, his voice warm with admiration. Dr. Hayes, thank you for standing up not just for your daughters, but for all of us who've witnessed these kinds of incidents and didn't know how to intervene effectively. What you did was important. Other passengers added their agreement and their own stories about witnessing or experiencing similar treatment, And Sharon realized this moment had become something larger than just protecting her daughter's seats. It had become a teaching moment about rights and dignity and the courage required to challenge authority when that authority is being exercised discriminatorily. As the flight finally took off, with Emma and Lily each securely in their own seats, Sharon thought about the conversation she'd have with them later about what had happened and why it mattered, about how Patricia had tried to make them share a seat not because of any actual policy, but because she'd looked at two black girls and decided they were the passengers whose comfort and rights mattered least, and how standing firm in the face of discrimination wasn't about being difficult or causing scenes. It was about refusing to accept less than what they deserved and what they'd paid for. She thought about all the other families who'd probably faced similar requests and complied because they didn't know their rights, or didn't want to make waves, or didn't have the professional knowledge to recognize discrimination when it was dressed up as reasonable accommodation. And she renewed her commitment to using her platform and her authority to push for systemic changes that would protect all families, not just those with lawyers for mothers who could cite federal regulations and threaten formal complaints.
What you just witnessed wasn't just about one flight attendant making one inappropriate request. It was about how black families are routinely asked to accept less than what they've paid for, to make themselves smaller and more convenient, to accommodate systems and people who've decided their comfort and dignity matter less than avoiding minor inconveniences for others. Dr. Sharon Hayes purchased 3 separate seats for herself and her 8-year-old twin daughters months in advance, planning and paying for the space her family would need. But Patricia looked at 2 small black girls and decided they could share a seat, freeing up space for other passengers who Patricia apparently deemed more deserving of individual seats. And she made this demand despite not asking any other passengers to consolidate, despite first-class passengers having empty seats beside them, despite no actual policy or regulation supporting her request. Think about what message Patricia was sending to Emma and Lily, that their tickets and their space and their mother's planning and payment didn't matter as much as the convenience of squeezing them together, that they should learn early to take up less space and make fewer demands and accept whatever accommodation adults decided was sufficient for children who looked like them. And understand that this is how racism shapes children's self-perception and their understanding of their place in the world, through 1,000 small messages that they're less deserving, less important, less entitled to the same treatment others receive automatically. The powerful irony that Patricia made this demand to a Department of Transportation attorney who literally prosecutes airlines for discrimination reveals how routine and normalized these practices have become, how employees feel comfortable making requests that violate federal regulations because they've never faced consequences, because families usually comply rather than fight, because systems protect employees who claim they were just following procedures, even when those procedures are applied selectively based on race. If this story made you angry, if you felt protective of Emma and Lily and proud of Sharon for standing firm, channel those feelings into examining how often you've witnessed or experienced similar demands for accommodation that weren't asked of everyone equally. How often children of color are told to share or squeeze or make do, while white children get full access to space and resources. How often families comply with inappropriate requests because fighting feels harder than accepting less than they deserve. Share this video because it illustrates that racism targets children, teaches them early that their needs matter less, shapes their understanding of their worth through accumulated experiences of being asked to make themselves smaller, and those early lessons create lasting impacts on how they navigate the world. Comment below with your own experiences of being asked to accommodate others in ways that weren't asked of white passengers, of watching your children learn painful lessons about how the world views them, of times when you stood firm or wished you had, because documenting these patterns makes it harder for institutions to dismiss them as isolated incidents or reasonable requests.
Subscribe if you believe that children who have tickets for seats shouldn't be forced to share because someone decided they're small enough to squeeze together. That Black families deserve the same access to space and comfort they've paid for as anyone else. That the next generation of Black children should grow up knowing their presence and their needs matter just as much as anyone else's. And most importantly, be the passenger who speaks up when you witness discrimination, who points out disparate treatment, who records evidence and offers witness statements, because your intervention can transform a family's isolated struggle into documented discrimination that demands accountability and drives the systemic changes that protect all families from employees who feel comfortable taking from those they perceive as having less power to fight back.